We have a very special guest with us today. We are honored to have NIS America in-house. Travis, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction.
We are excited to have you here. We have a ton of fans that they are super excited to hear all about NIS America and Nipponichi Software itself, and we're just overjoyed. So let me dive right into it. So although I know our audience is familiar already with NIS America, but can you just give us a kind of a brief history on both NISA and the parent company? Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, so Nipponichi Software is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. It was originally founded, of course, in Japan to create, its earliest titles were on the Super Famicom. So they are one of the more experienced developers out there. They're also self-publishing, which is kind of a big thing, and a lot of people have never sort of heard about them. They've been sort of perpetually indie for the last 25 years. I had a chance to actually go out and see them this year when we were there for Tokyo Game Show. They're headquartered in a sort of relatively small area of Japan called Gifu Prefecture, which is a little bit inside from Nagoya, more inland. They are most prolific for delivering kind of the real standouts in strategy RPGs. So a lot of people are familiar with, of course, the Disgaea series, but a lot of our efforts at NIS have been sort of all over the place in different categories, just from Nipponichi Software as the developer. So titles like the isometric survival horror Yomawari, the upcoming Liar Princess and the Blind Prince. There's sort of a range of different things that they do, and it's kind of always amazing to see what's coming next from them. As for ourselves, NIS America, we are celebrating our 15th anniversary this year. We originally started in 2003 after the successful release of the original Disgaea for PlayStation 2. Basically, at that point, NIS decided, well, I think we've made a big enough success to create our own publisher in the West. And so they founded NIS America with the intent of becoming essentially the publishing arm for Nipponichi Software in America. Since then, we have grown substantially. We offer publishing for both North America and for Europe, through a number of different distributor partners that we work with over there. So in more recent years, it's been really interesting to see a lot of our fans coming in from Europe as well. We do publishing not just for Nipponichi Software titles, but also for other developers. Prior to their branching out into their own American division, we were previously publishers for Spike Chunsoft's Danganronpa series. In addition, we published titles for our Kadokawa games such as God Wars and Metal Max Xeno, and other companies as well. This year, we were very, very honored to be able to publish for SNK, both SNK Heroines and SNK 40th Anniversary Collection coming up.
You've pretty much, he's already covered the interview. We don't even have to go
every question we had. You literally answered. I think there's one game that I have in my list of discussions here that you did not mention.
Well, I think that's what's really great here now is that we can really dive in deep on these things, because I gave a very broad, sort of expansive look at it.
You did. No, that was fantastic. That was wonderful. Thank you for that. So NIS America provides something kind of unique to Western markets with that blend that you're talking about, the releases from Nipponichi and from other developers. And when it comes to the title, the actual titles created by NIS, I'm sure there's just this super strong brand connection there because of who you guys are. You know, it's the same company essentially, right? But what goes into the decision-making process for what is coming across to the Western shores for those NIS developed games?
That's interesting. It is true that we publish the bulk majority of NIS titles, but there are people with a more watchful eye may notice that we don't publish every NIS title in America. Some titles just on basis of what they're trying to achieve or the target market for it or something, or the character count or how we have to fit it into a greater sort of calendar for the year. All these things come into play, obviously at the outset, and we have to consider that when creating that initial sort of announcement window towards the marketing plan to the full release. Internally, there's a lot of conversation that typically goes on between the producers and other departments. Well, typically the producers by themselves at the beginning will take a look at a project and determine, what is the potential of this title. That's sort of how things start out, and we don't have, the grandest of expectations for every title. I've worked at several other large companies in the past, and it really is a sort of market by scale, and our sort of more modest leaning expectations of titles also come into how we decide which title gets published. But we are very proud of each and every NIS title that we bring out in North America and Europe.
Obviously, the Disgaea series comes to mind when we're thinking about NIS, and we've recently seen Disgaea 1 Complete released on the Switch. Considering now that we have both 1 and 5, would you think it's a pretty good possibility that we're going to see 2 through 4 at some point?
Well, again, keen-eyed listeners may know about the Japanese title of Disgaea 1 Complete, which is, of course, Disgaea 1 Refine. That's how they released it in Japan. Mm-hmm. We are very much into building up this brand identity as these complete titles. Yeah. So Disgaea 5 Complete coming out and combining all the previously released DLC and even adding some more content to it for its Switch release. And then Disgaea 1 Complete, taking all the content that has been created for Disgaea 1 since its launch through PSP, DS, and PC, and combining that and even giving it a brand new coat of paint for that release, really encompassing this idea of complete. So when we're looking at these titles, especially Disgaea, we really want to continue this idea of complete. And so while we have nothing to announce at this point, I just want to really emphasize that is sort of Disgaea is a premier title for us. It is a series we put a lot of love into, and in return, Nintendo fans have shown a huge amount of love for us. So that has been pretty reciprocal, and we really do appreciate it, and we want to continue it.
When Disgaea originally released, back in its original form, it scored well, but it was often referred to as the best game that nobody played. Now, obviously, the series has found an audience, and I'm looking forward to more Disgaea on Switch for sure. But did the Steam release of Disgaea PC help push the plan to bring Disgaea 1 to Switch at all?
I'm wondering about that. Really, from my perspective, I would say that the biggest thing that brought Disgaea 1 Complete to creation was actually the anniversary, the 15th anniversary. So we had actually, done Disgaea 5 Complete the year before. It had done incredibly well for us on Switch. It actually was, and we can go into it a little bit later, but it was basically the catalyst for a lot of what I've been calling the year of Switch for us, where we've been basically identified as probably the second most prolific publisher of Switch games this year in terms of total quantity. It's because of our trust in the system, really. But the idea of this Disgaea 1 Complete came from it is the 15th anniversary and the success of Disgaea 5 Complete. Those were the sort of the two major factors that came in to the decision-making process.
All right, but speaking of Steam releases, might there be a chance of seeing something like Phantom Brave come to the Switch, since it got re-released on PC and had a really positive reception as well?
We are always looking at our previous titles. Something that people will probably pick up on it is that we never turn down the idea of putting something out on a different platform if there seems to be an audience that is receptive to it. As for some of the other titles like Phantom Brave, we were always in talks with our head studio about that. A lot of times it does come down to where it falls on their schedule. They have lots of new products that they're dealing with, and so whenever they can fit in the time, we do like them working on making sure that older titles are also paid attention to, but that it's a lot about it. It comes down to schedule.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a delicate mix, to work between what you've got kind of new, what you've got, out there that has been established, but maybe isn't on a specific platform, especially when it comes to something like the Switch, where you've got this massively growing base of users. And of course, with Nintendo's sort of loyal following, some of those folks aren't as familiar with some of the titles that you might have put out on, say, Sony platforms for the most part, that type of thing. So I think that's kind of an interesting look, from our angle, being fans, that type of thing.
And even from there, and this is anecdotally my own experience sort of observing trends in the industry, but a lot of times when we're looking at this sort of thing, the breakdown is that somebody typically owns maybe a PS4 and a PC, or an Xbox One and a PC, or a Switch and a PC. And so we know that we're not always targeting PlayStation users with a Switch with our titles. That it isn't just people going like, oh, I know those guys. They did all those titles on PS2 or PS3.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even to say that about younger gamers who may not have been gaming at the time that those things released. So it's been really incredible to open ourselves up to a sort of a brand new demographic, especially younger Switch fans. I think that's been one of the most rewarding aspects of this, and why we keep pushing so hard for it.
You touched on something when you were talking about Disgaea, about the trust that you have in the platform. Now, we've spoken with a number of publishers and developers for the Switch since our inception. And I'd say one of the most common things that we hear from them is that Nintendo itself has dramatically improved this entire development and publishing experience on the new platform. Would you say that you agree? And if so, for you, what makes that true?
Well, just some background on myself, I'm the marketing manager for NIS America, and I joined the team last year in June. Prior to that, I had worked for other companies such as Crytek and for Konami. And so my relationship with Nintendo has sort of changed over the years, depending on who I was working for and what type of titles we were publishing. Sort of what rather well renowned is the fact that Konami didn't publish any titles for the Wii U. Period. So there was a large part of my time where I was not connected to anybody at Nintendo. That being said, when I joined on, we had already had sort of conversations and relationships with people at Nintendo here, though they hadn't really been opened since Disgaea for the DS. So there was a sort of a long time between Disgaea for the DS, and then we did a game called Rodeo the Sky Soldier for 3DS and for Wii U and Wii. And that was the last time that anybody at NIS America had actually talked to somebody from Nintendo, really. And so when Disgaea 5 came out, we were talking very closely with Nintendo because it was a near launch title. And then that success led us to really start taking, and we redirected a lot of our materials to make sure that we were publishing on Switch from then on out. And so that required really constant talking with Nintendo reps, and we've really gotten to know them over there. Been by the office a couple of times since. They're really interested in our lineup. We're really interested in making sure that we're working closer with them. They've been a really, really important first-party partner for us. And from the perspective of a fan, I think there's a lot of ideas of how companies sort of hedge their bets with different first parties. But honestly, NIS America has never really sided with one over the other. It was whatever sort of offered the opportunity at the time. I would say that it has become easier through a number of different ways, which I'm not, of course, able to discuss too deeply on. But basically, I think a combination of definitely a warming on the part of Nintendo with the stripping of some of the more onerous conditions for publishing have led to a really good working relationship with them, and we're really, really excited about being able to talk to them about this.
That pretty much echoes what we've heard in other ways. I mean, we are how can I put this, moderately familiar with some of the restrictions that were in place with some of the things involved in publishing and distributing previously.
Sure.
So it's interesting to hear this continued tone where, that warming you talk about is a common theme. From a fan aspect, as well, I kind of put this out there as a representative of a group of fans. It's nice for us to hear that. We want to hear that. We're happy,
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest things related to this is that, I think a lot of people, when they look at it and they look how Nintendo reacted, especially during Gen 6, Gen 7, they were frequently seen as being the old man in the room, that their policies about online or about growing influencer sort of opportunities and things like that always seemed rather old-fashioned. And to be fair, they're an older company. They're
Yes.
in operation since 1897 or something like that. So I've worked with a lot of Japanese companies, and they can be varying different degrees of controlling or difficult to deal with at times. And I'm sure that was the case, more or less back then. I think something really did change. I can't say for sure, but it really does feel like there's a big push from someone internally to change how their approach is with these sorts of things.
Yeah. So another game you mentioned, this is great that you brought this up. And by the time this airs, Yomawari, the Long Night Collection, will be coming out in a couple of days. So can you kind of tell us a bit about the two games that are in that collection for anybody that hasn't had a chance to familiarize himself? Because I don't know that this is going to be a title that, everybody's going to immediately go, oh, I know exactly what those are. It'll have some fans that know about it, but this is going to be a little bit different for some fans. Yeah,
I love any opportunity I get to talk about Yomawari. It's one of my favorite titles that we have over here. Basically, Yomawari is an isometric survival horror game where you play as a young girl in a rural town in Japan and are currently accosted by sort of ghosts and demons. And you have very sort of simple objectives in a rather open area to achieve from the viewpoint of a child. So when you open up your map, it's made with crayon, and the notes that each character takes down are very sort of simple in the mind of a child. To sort of step back a little bit, I love talking about this aspect too. Yomawari was actually the product of an Inside Indies competition inside of NIS in Japan. So basically every year, Nipponichi, they have a internal contest to see, and anybody in the company can pitch. It's totally open to anybody in the company, and they can pitch any idea they want to make a game. And then they vote on the game, and then they decide based on that which game to make. And Mizukami-san was a illustrator who had the idea of, I want to tell this story that is very familiar to my upbringing in Japan and sort of in rural Japan specifically, where I was always afraid of the things that lurked in the shadows, the things that were always right out of the corner of my vision, and sort of designed this entire game with a sort of hand-drawn, crafted style. And it was such a success with Yomawari Night Alone, originally published on PlayStation Vita, that the next year we were able to make the sequel, Midnight Shadows, published for PlayStation 4 and for Vita. We're really happy that we're able to put out both of them in this collection. This is, of course, the first time Night Alone has been on sort of in a console format and something that you can play on the big screen. Both have transitioned very well to the Switch hardware, and I highly recommend playing them with directional audio and in a dimly lit or dark room.
Not a coincidence when this is coming out then.
No. We actually every year we angle the release right around Halloween, and it's very much, very, very much on purpose.
We don't have enough horror type games on the Switch yet.
It is one of those things. I look on the store, and you see them trickle in oftentimes through the eShop, right? It's a largely digital sort of. I mean, that's let's be honest, since 2007, 2008, that's where a lot of horror games, especially really popular horror games, have gotten their start, is basically through digital distribution. The real ones that you can think of that come to mind, things like Doki Doki Literature Club, those are things that started in digital format. I think one of the more popular ones that we've seen on Switch recently would be something like, I think it's called Angels of Death or Angel of Death. And it's the game that was made into an anime last cour, and was, I think, originally made on something like, was like RPG Maker or something like that. So it was like a Corpse Party type title, which of course Corpse Party has lots of history on Nintendo systems as well. Yomawari is, I think, sometimes maybe gets lumped into that same sort of category, but it's so much more kind of produced. So it's got a great sort of natural hand-drawn aesthetic to it, and a lot of care is taken into this, especially the audio design.
NIS America's publishing and distribution capabilities, you've been a rather popular choice to bring over some great other third-party developed games. Is there something that you look for in specific titles from other developers, and how do your long-standing relationships with certain developers play into those decisions?
Broadly speaking, good faith begets more good faith. So what I mean by that is that we try to cultivate our titles around publishers and not necessarily around titles. Getting a good title is great, and we appreciate it, and it oftentimes makes a lot, from my point of view, makes my job a lot easier. It's very, very easy to sell a really impressive title. But oftentimes what we're looking for is making sure that we're establishing long-term relationships with our publishing partners. So when we jump in with a new publisher, we are looking to maximize everything that they want to go with, that they want to bring to a Western audience. There's oftentimes not, besides some very rare cases, depending on sort of more or less content and its appropriateness, we are always looking to any sort of title, any sort of genre, whatever there is a publisher who is in Japan who is making good work and wants to bring it stateside, we are interested, and we are taking those calls and we are making those meetings. In particular, we oftentimes look towards, of course, specifically companies that don't have an American branch and typically are more focused on things along the lines of RPGs. Those are sort of the things that the calling cards that we're known for. There's the things that we get recognized, especially in Japan, for. So those are things that other companies are looking at us for. If they have an RPG, they typically tend to look at us, and a couple other companies as well in the West. But we, we're always very competitive on those.
I want Cyrix to ask his next question before I go to mine, because I think it pairs a little bit with what we were talking about.
Okay. I actually, just right before you do, I do want to jump out and just say that when I say that we tend to be known with RPGs, I like to also think that with our current lineup, if you look at our things that we're doing recently, we are definitely branching out into all sorts of new categories. SNK Heroines was a big one for me this year. That was something that I sort of handled up from a product management standpoint. It was very strong. I love fighting games. I love working on fighting games. So that was one that was a lot of people looked at us and they said, "Wait, NIS is publishing that?" Yes, because we should be more than just RPGs. The people who work here, the big portion of them are gamers, and we're very excited about very different types of games.
Yeah, when SNK Heroines launched, I actually watched the Twitch stream that NIS America put on, part of the launch thing.
That was a lot of fun.
I did watch that. Well, my next question, and it comes with a bit of a nudge, is are there any collaborations coming up that you can share with the audience? And the reason why I ask something like this is because Spike Chunsoft's Danganronpa series is a fan favorite that they're really hoping comes to the Switch. Like, our community is ravenous for games like that, and it's been brought up on more than 12 occasions. And you guys help bring that to a worldwide market on other systems. So we're really wanting to know if something like that's coming. But if there are any other collaborations you can speak of, we would love to know. Yeah.
Well, I can't speak directly to, of course, now Spike Chunsoft has their own publishing branch in America, Spike Chunsoft. I've really enjoyed playing Shibuya Scramble, and I'm really looking forward to some of their more upcoming titles. I'm also a huge Fire Pro fan, so I really like the stuff that they're doing over there. Why I bring this up is because now that they do have their own publishing branch, our deal with Danganronpa, it was specifically for console release. Danganronpa on PC was published directly by Spike Chunsoft in Japan. Now that they're sort of taking over more ownership of their titles, kind of what you see from us is kind of what there is. I can't really speak to the future of how that's going to work with their company, but I just like to point out personally, I love their titles. I love what they're doing. I can't wait to see what's next from them. For other partnerships, I think that we've had a lot of real successes this year. I think particularly I've really enjoyed being able to revive several so-called dead titles with a huge developer. I was a huge fan of Goichi Suda, aka Suda51, and being able to do Silver Case that we did last year, 25th Ward that we did this spring, and our upcoming Killer 7 for Steam. We do these things. We undergo these sort of unusual arrangements, bringing back dead games from well-known publishers or from well-known developers and stuff like that, because we want to encourage more work with them. So I think if you look at the people that we're working with now, that's kind of how you see where we're angling for in the future. I think that's where you can start to see the patterns emerge. So I can't speak directly to them, but I encourage everyone to take a look at our current lineup and sort of extrapolate from there what you will.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that lineup in a different way, because you already sort of kind of went this direction a little bit, right? NISA has this rather new and interesting partnership with SNK, and you've talked about how you released SNK Heroines. Plus, we have the highly anticipated, and I'm going to say this personally, I'm really, really, really looking forward to this. The highly anticipated SNK 40th anniversary collection coming up very soon.
Oh, yeah.
How did the relationship with SNK come to be?
Really, it kind of actually predates my time at NIS. I know that sort of it's kind of interesting to always watch this, even from an insider. But the way that the working relationships happen in Japan is almost on like a totally different scale. You do get to know a lot of people around the industry through various different connections. I myself enjoy knowing people from various different companies like Namco and Sega and EA and other things, mostly through people who I've worked with in the past who go on to work at other places, and you continue these professional relationships. In Japan, it is obviously an island nation of 140 million people, but it is sort of geographically small. So a lot of times there are these circles that people travel in: the Osaka development circle, the Tokyo development circle, etc. And I know that especially at our highest level, Mr. Yamashita, who is our CEO, is basically, he's very well known in the industry. He is friends with kind of everyone. And so it doesn't surprise me at all that he was able to get in contact with these guys from SNK and begin a conversation about upcoming titles. And these things are typically, years in advance of anything happening. And obviously when they originally start out, it's just kind of a get to know you situation, and it may not ever turn into anything. I think you could line entire books of history about the industry in half deals that never got done, right? So a couple of years ago, the conversations began. They start talking about upcoming titles. They talk about their slate. Obviously, at this point, SNK is a brand that is kind of rebuilding from a long period of sort of smaller development, right? So up until 2001, then there was the sort of rebranding, and then they sort of became SNK Playmore for a while, and all these things. And then basically around the time they started working on KOF 14 was like a huge began this huge sort of rebuild process for them. And sort of off the success of KOF 14, we started getting to know them. And so I think that I oftentimes credit our CEO with his sort of excellent relationships and his great salesmanship attitude that is credited as a huge success to how we are able to get such high quality titles.
So are you yourself a fan of the older SNK games? And if so, what are you looking forward to playing?
Oh, absolutely. I've actually been a huge fan of their ACA hamster titles that they've been releasing on Switch. I picked up like Waku Waku 7, Magical Drop 3. I'm literally wearing the Fangamer Metal Slug hoodie right now. I am a big SNK fan. It was a real honor to be able to work with them on a title for a series that I have been a huge fan since KOF 96. You know, I get real flustered by this, but I am such like a big SNK nerd, and it's been so much fun to work with them and be part of this really cool like rebirth of the brand.
I'm going to jump right in and just tell you that 94, 95, and 96 were my favorite years on that.
I gotta maybe jump in and argue that 98 was kind of.
98's good too.
98 is so good, so dang good.
But see, I'm an old man. Okay, so my like time. Yeah, I am. Can you hear it in my voice? I go back to like earlier titles than that for the things that I really love. But when it came to KOF, I was like, oh man, this is just so good, and it brings back these great memories for me during that period of time. And by the time like 97, 98 came out, I was still playing, but I wasn't quite playing those as much anymore. But you know, if we get out of the KOF era, if we don't talk about that, because there's a million titles from them that are just so awesome. Metal Slug is insane. I mean, you're talking about wearing the hoodie, and Metal Slug just brings back these amazing memories. And I still kick that up myself, but I want to go back into one of the titles that they're actually a series of titles that they're putting into the anniversary collection, Ikari Warriors.
Yes, of course. I'm related to roughly both now, sort of after all this time, related to Metal Slug and through KOF through Ralph and Clark. Mm-hmm. It's amazing. It's really cool. Ikari Warriors is on there, of course. We actually have basically all versions of Ikari, so it's both the arcade and the US version, the arcade and the console version, the US and the Japanese version. And for the arcade version, it actually has options, so all the dip switches that would have been available in the arcade for those machines. So things like in Ikari 2, turning on or off PvP, depending on how much Battletoads you want to go with your friends.
That is going to be fantastic. And you guys are supporting online play with that, right?
It's actually just local play.
Oh,
so just local for that one. But there are some really cool functionality related to that. One of the things that I recommend people checking out is Fangamer's Flip Grip, which is a way to orient your Switch vertically. And we're one of the first titles to natively support this functionality. So you can play all of our titles vertically by turning the Switch sideways and being able to fill up more of that screen, because much like a lot of those titles, like Ikari in the arcades, were played on these long vertical cabinets as opposed to sort of the 4x3 that most people are familiar with.
Yeah, that's going to be great. That I can't recommend that series enough. It's just a blast. Victory Road is great. You know, really, you guys are firing on all cylinders when it comes to this particular partnership. But I'm gonna let Cyrix get into the next thing, because I know he's probably chomping at the bit for this one.
You're done being giddy for a little bit?
I can't help it. This is good stuff.
So we can't mention SNK without mentioning fighters.
Obviously.
Yeah.
So we've seen a large number of fighters popping up on Switch, but recently we've seen developers creating them with characters from their own games, like an amalgamation of all their characters cameoing into a single game. Has NIS ever thought to dabble in a fighting genre for the library, from their library of characters?
You know, they're actually really, really open to the idea of guesting with a lot of the library. So that's never really been an issue. I think the issue, generally speaking, is that fighting game development is a very it's a very specific skill set, right? And I don't think there's anybody necessarily on staff who is really into fighting game development or understands fighting game development. So while I would not ever say that it's outside the realm of possibility to see NIS characters appear in a fighting game, I wouldn't hold your breath regarding NIS developing a fighting game.
Well, you have this wonderful new partnership with people that are pretty familiar with fighting games.
I know one or two.
So before we escape the area of kind of game development, there is one other question I had, and this is the one that I moved a little bit because we were in such a groove talking about the others. I did want to ask, are there any challenges with regards to the localization of games that you guys have been able to bring over to the U.S.?
There's always the challenge of localization. I think it sort of fits under the rules of the threes. You can do something either fast, good, or cheap. Pick two, right?
Yeah.
And so there's always going to be that struggle. We want to produce the best localization that we can for our titles. We also want to make sure that our titles come out in a timely fashion. We don't want people waiting over a year in the difference between the release in Japan and release in North America and Europe. We are also expanding our localization to French. So a lot of our major titles, you may have seen, things like Labyrinth of Refrain and Disgaea 1 Complete, also came in French. And so as we continue to improve and invest in our localization staff, there are still a lot of challenges to overcome. I think that I don't want to talk about it too much, but I know that this is a lot of ways related to how Ys 8 was released last year, and we have made huge strides since then, and definitely looked to how to fix that situation and implemented great changes internally to ensure that our thing is about accessibility and making sure that we have the most authentic experience translated of those original titles to an English-speaking and French-speaking audience.
I know that the challenges, the differences between the regions, there's a lot that plays into that, right? Because there's culture differences, there's language intricacies, things that don't come across in one language as they might in another. So it's a translation, a localization isn't necessarily just saying, here are the words that this person said. You can't really just do that. It has a tone, it has a story driving aspect to it. So
there's a lot of, I would say that there's a lot of interpretation that goes into this idea of translation, localization. And I think that if you give a set of materials to 3 different translators, 3 different editors, you will get sort of 3 different similar, but 3 different takes on how that could probably best be conveyed. It happens more in Japanese than, say, another Latin or Romantic language. I think our languages are similar enough from, say, English to Spanish to Italian that you can make those transitions fairly easily, mostly dealing with grammar, and what really winds up being different in Japanese is usually related to not both sort of grammatical rules and then also some pretty big differences in culture.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Japanese in particular maybe a little bit more challenging.
So we're gonna kind of shift gears here for this last segment of questions here, because we've gone so far into this development world and games themselves, but let's kind of talk about some other aspects here, because a good number of the collectors out there are enamored with the little collectibles and add-ins that you guys feature within your collector's editions. So we're kind of curious what goes into the selection of what you put into those editions.
So one of the things that we start with here is a sort of kickoff party with the talks between the people who are working on the game, the translators and localization staff, and then the design staff, the people who are going to make the items, and then marketing is also pulled in as well as the producers. So it is sort of a meeting of all the different minds inside the company, the people who both know the market very well, know craftsmanship very well, know the title very well, and we start spitballing a bunch of different ideas about what can we do, what can we fit in, basically what hits the budget, which is always, of course, a big part of this. And this is not just limited to the things that we put in, say like the EZ Adventurers Edition, which did have pack ends, but also our limited edition that we sell off of our store page, which we put a lot of effort into, and I put a huge amount of our success and praise that we've received for those directly on our designers. They've done really incredible stuff. It is a very community-based process. I've put stuff in my ideas myself. And a lot of times we sort of split the the responsibilities, that the people who suggest the idea oftentimes have to go chasing down for quotes from vendors about costs and stuff. If you have a great idea, that's great, but you put in your work too.
Is it safe to say that if NIS is putting out a game, there's probably going to be a special edition available for it?
Traditionally, that's the case. I would say that in certain cases, depending on what our expected goals are for a certain title or how we're handling that title, we may or may not receive a special edition. Most of the cases, I would say yes, about 90% of the time, we do have a special edition. You also may notice that we also have special editions for other titles as well. Some of our partner titles that we've done for Koei, like Harvest Moon, those were special editions that were actually produced by NIS, or rather NIS America. Since
we've turned to more of the collector side of, I'd like to ask about the internal cover art or reversible covers and inserts like instruction manuals. Can we hope to see more of this? Because games that were published like Happy Birthdays had a book, Labyrinth of Refrain and Disgaea 5 had reversible covers, but other games like Fallen Legions and God War is just nothing. It was just white with the legal tag.
It depends a lot about our scheduling and our budgeting, but yeah, we tend to want to do reversible cover sheets. I recommend everybody try to follow us on social media, because we will announce before, and we typically have contests. We don't just usually put a reversible cover sheet in. We typically open it up for people on polls. We try to get what the fans want to see. I would also recommend checking out our websites for Disgaea 1 and for Labyrinth. You can actually go to the website and print out your own alternative cover sheets that were not selected by the fans, but fans obviously wanted them, so we made them available through other means.
Go ahead and give everybody the @ and the website address.
Yeah, we're at NIS America, and I think our Facebook is NIS America Inc. Oh, and the websites. I think it's Disgaea.us is the Disgaea homepage, but you can find everything that's associated with our different things at nisamerica.com.
Just want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to visit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So have there been any collector's editions where you guys were unable to add some collectibles that were originally planned, or can you tell us if there was some stuff that you wanted to do that you didn't get to do with those?
Yeah, so obviously we go through a pretty rote process of throwing out basically any idea that anybody has at the beginning, and then eventually voting them down into sort of a more predictable, or not predictable, but more sensible, I guess, or just sort of getting the idea of what the group kind of wants from it. I would say that of the most recent stuff, I'd maybe go with Disgaea 1, because that was a big conversation. Obviously, a lot of people had plenty to say about such a sort of a classic entry, and there were a lot of different ideas out there that included things like Laharl's scarf, but that was kind of seen as being like, well, it's just a big long red scarf. Like how much can you really do with it? There's not anything particularly authentic about that, or maybe just a T-shirt with like his torso on it, which is like sort of just a bare chest but really thin. Things like that idea. There's a bunch of different printing stuff that came through until we eventually got into the idea of like the printing cube. So it's like a square printing plush. That was actually something that we wanted to do beforehand, and then never really found a place for it. And then when we realized we were doing Disgaea 1 Complete, said, oh, this is the perfect place for having that. Originally, it was going to be 6 coasters, but that really kind of got the kibosh because the coasters were a great idea, but they incorporated too many different types of printies, specifically printies outside of Disgaea 1. So if you want the full set, we have the 3 that are in the D1C, which is Big Sis, Curtis Printy, and Standard Printy. And then the ones for the extended set are Hero Printy, Usalia's Printy from D5C, that's the yellow Printy, and a 6th one that will remain a mystery because I can't recall it.
That's okay. I mean, so the live pony in that you were going to pack into Harvest Moon just was a no-go. Couldn't do it.
No, though it was kind of, that one in particular was kind of funny because a late stage addition suddenly was, so we have all these chocolate cows, sort of these brown cow plushes, and we just don't know. And like, oh god, there's no space in the box, and we managed to ship them out with them, but yeah, I will say for Disgaea 1 Complete, just real quick, there is one item that I hope defines my enduring legacy, and that is the Etna no-pie mouse pad.
Yes, we are all familiar with the mouse pads.
And this one in particular is not an opie mouse pad; it's a no-pie mouse pad. It's completely flat.
Yes,
it's funny that you mentioned the chocolate cows, because in our Discord server for the community, the chocolate cow was so popular that Soul actually had to make an emote of the chocolate cow.
I did.
I love hearing that. It was it's one of those things that's like, yeah, it's a challenge because it's being brought in pretty late in the process, but it's one of those things where you look at it and go, well, this has to happen.
The chocolate cow is a particular favorite. That is for sure.
Yeah, and we were just discussing Printy a little bit ago, actually, and I was talking about the shirts that are on your site and how badly I want the shirt that's like free shrugs, dude. I love that.
Oh yeah, free shrugs. Free shrugs is great. It's kind of funny in any given part of the day, depending on the sort of the veteran status of the employee, you can usually spot at least 2 or 3 different Printy shirts from the last 15 years and someone on the office.
So your collector's editions are sold exclusively through your own website if we ignore the secondary market, of course. So what was the deciding factor behind doing that as opposed to letting retail shops offer the multiple editions of your games?
Well, the most expensive or the most value that any retail space has is space. So the thing that is sort of most important to them, the thing that is most precious to them, is how much space they can allocate towards a title or towards a product comparative to the rest of the store. For that reason, getting in limited edition games into stores, while previously was seen as fairly easy or more accessible, has definitely become more difficult over time. In addition, so the idea is that, number one, retailers don't want so many limited editions anymore. That's a big one. I'd say the number 2 for us is being able to control a lot of the factors that go into how they're displayed and how they're sold. We control a lot of the things from our own distribution warehouses. So having that sort of quality control over our own product is pretty important to us. I would say thirdly, it allows us to get away with a lot of stuff in regards to what we put in there and whatever we feel like we want to put in. We don't have to really be withholden to certain conditions and things if we handle it ourselves. That being said, we do offer some of our limited editions, have in the past, and probably will continue to in some limited format in the future, eventually do make their way to retail. For instance, the upcoming Liar Princess and the Blind Prince, that will be sold exclusively as a limited edition into retail.
Yeah, I think we've seen the listing for that on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've already pre-ordered it.
Same.
Thank you.
So that leads me into like the next question is that we have seen publishers Most specifically comes to mind is Square, who have offered some of their standard edition available only through their website, like they did with Lost Sphere. Is there anything that NIS has thought about as well, or maybe even partnering with a retail chain to offer some exclusive item just to them or on their site?
We've done that in the past. Occasionally, we're offered by certain retailers, and they will request that we have something special for them, or they encourage us to come and proposition them with an idea of something specific they can get in return. This is a lot of times depending on the location. So I think that it's most effective in certain markets like in France and Germany, though we have seen stuff in Canada, and we've even done a couple of US ones as well in the past. I will say that retail is a continuously evolving platform that we have to address in a case-by-case basis sort of as everything changes, because everything continues to change.
So it looks like in 2019, we're definitely going to see some great stuff ahead from NIS America. I'm personally looking forward to RPG Maker MV and a few of the others you guys have announced already. Do you want to kind of expand on that at all? And maybe if even if it's extremely vague, maybe give us a little hint for our listeners and viewers of what else might be in the pipeline?
Yeah, I'd love to pull the curtain back a little bit and sort of explain that when it comes to Japanese companies in particular, always look towards sort of their Q1 offerings, because the way that this is sort of more business and wonky-ish, but the way that stuff is calculated in terms of revenue by company depends a lot about how you report. And that changes depending typically on where the company is headquartered. So Japanese headquartered companies report in April, which is the beginning of the fiscal year for Japanese companies. This is different for different companies, American companies, French companies. I think these all sort of have varying different things that slide between December and April, or October and April, I think. And so it's always really interesting to look at, and I'm speaking more broadly, not based on NIS America, but just as a fan of the industry and following different companies. But it's always really interesting to watch, say, like when Capcom, what they're doing in the Q1, because they oftentimes like to release those big titles right in sort of that February and March category, mostly because, again, they're Japanese, so they don't really deal with that big push it out of Q3 for the Christmas thing that we do. Mm-hmm. As for our slate, we are in the middle, of course, of our release cycle, although we have done most of the major releases for the rest of the year. We are still pushing behind Labyrinth of Refrain to Sky One Complete. For next year, we are really excited about a lot of those titles. Working directly with Kadokawa, and not Kadokawa Games, but Kadokawa, which is a different entity. It's complicated. But for RPG Maker MV, we, of course, released Fez last year for the 3DS. MV is the first sort of mainline title. So people who are familiar with RPG Maker will know that MV released as Trinity on the PC, and we're bringing the console version, MV, that's PlayStation 4, Nintendo Switch, and Xbox One. I'm actually really happy to announce that the creation software versus the player, which is called the Maker Player, that Maker Player has cross-platform functionality. So from a Switch, you'll be able to actually play games created on the Xbox One version of the game. So that's really cool.
That's amazing. Is great. I've been dabbling in RPG Maker since I was in high school, and I've all the iterations leading up into the current form, and I'm super excited about that. Now I just got to figure out a way to design a game in RPG Maker and then get a publishing company to actually publish it for me.
Yeah, that's kind of the big one. What's really great here for the console versions is that each version, including the Switch version, has native USB keyboard support. So it's going to be a lot easier than Fez's sort of cumbersome touchpad entry. I will say that it sort of brings all the utility of the most recent version, including the multi-view, which is the ability to play. I mean, previous RPG Maker games have been played in this sort of Dragon Quest front view, and this allows you to do a Final Fantasy style side-by-side view. So that's a big first for the series, and it really is just as easy as flipping a switch.
What about some of the other titles that you guys are bringing in some of the stuff we've seen?
So some of the other stuff which we announced back in Anime Expo this year would be The Princess Guide, which was released in Japan by our head office under the title Your Four Knights Princesses Training Story, which is just a little too much for us. So when we took it, we came up with the title The Princess Guide. It is a spiritual sequel to Penny Punching Princess that we released on the Switch earlier this year. In it, you play as the titular Princess Guide, guiding four different princesses on their own, each with their own storyline, and sort of combines this sort of meta strategy game with the point-to-point brawler mechanics, the sort of top-down brawler mechanics that were present in Penny Punching. We also have, of course, RPG Maker, and then after that, we'll have Liar Princess and the Blind Prince, which, like I mentioned before about Yomawari, was the most recent recipient of the Inside Indies contest at NIS. And then we also, of our announced titles, we also have the Caligula Effect Overdose. So the Caligula Effect was a title that was released last year by Atlas on Vita, just for Vita, just digitally. A lot of people got it, thought it was pretty good, but thought maybe that it was a little hamstringed by the technical restraints. So they released an updated version in Japan called Caligula Overdose, which was for the PS4. We think this title is really great. It's got a lot of potential. It's made by great staff, like the former writer of Persona 1 and Persona 2. We want to see this thing really take off. So when we took on the title from Fudio, we told them, okay, but we want to bring it to Switch. We want to bring it to PC. So we've taken the effort to make sure that this works on the Switch and is coming in spring as well.
That's fantastic.
So if you're a little bit bummed that Persona hasn't made its way to Switch yet, this is made by the father of Persona and shares a lot of that same approach with a really cool, totally different combat system, but with a real focus on that subversive philosophy under the guise of high school life.
We know how loved the Persona series itself is, and the boy, that's just got a lot of loyalty to it. So anything attached to that, I'm sure, will do well anyways. And coming from similar producers, directors, writers, etc., is a huge boon to another game when it has that kind of connection. Typically, for normal interviews, this would kind of be the end, but we like to do one other question. We always kind of throw out a bonus question. In most cases, has almost literally nothing to do with anything we've talked about to this point. So,
got me on the edge of my seat.
Yes. So I had the joy of writing this particular question because usually Cyrix does it. But this time I had an opportunity, so I did this one. I am originally from Southern California. I grew up in Long Beach.
Okay.
I currently live in Indiana. Long story. I've been in Indiana for about 12 and a half years. But when you are raised in Southern California, that never leaves, right? So
yeah.
The question is, in the everlasting debate about which franchise has the best burger around, can you explain why the answer is In-N-Out and no other?
This is really tough. This is a little tougher for me, not only because I was born and bred Southern California myself, Manhattan Beach, but I also have a lot of family in Texas, home of Whataburger.
Whataburger.
Yeah. So I gotta tread carefully on this question, but honestly, it is a bit of the people bring out that question, right? Is it In-N-Out? Is it Whataburger? Is it Shake Shack? And I actually did go this year and have my first Shake Shack shake and burger. And I gotta say, while they have probably the taste beat, In-N-Out delivers the full package. Basically, you get an In-N-Out and you get out of In-N-Out in a fast time with a good burger, and your pockets are not too light. And that's really the big difference for me is that I go to Shake Shack, okay, that's $20 for a meal. I go to In-N-Out, that's $7. So, you can if you're a money bags, just always going for that top end, that's there for you. But for In-N-Out, you can't beat the full package.
I appreciate that answer.
I've not eaten at any of those 3 establishments.
No, you get White Castle as the answer for you, right?
No.
Is that DQ country out there?
We do have DQ, but really, I mean, if you're looking for like the gourmet type burger establishments, we have stuff like Red Robin, and we have like Smash Burger and stuff. But
we got Red Robin back in California too, but I think the equivalent is Five Guys.
Five Guys is I don't even get started on how much Five Guys, but the we used to have like GD Ritzy's in this area, and that was really good. And there's like 1 or 2 left. They're trying to bring them back, I think, in Ohio or something right now. But we don't. The local establishment, like if you come to this part of Kentucky, which is like the Lexington area, we have a place called Tally Ho. And Tally Ho is, if you want a greasy burger at 3:00 in the morning, that's Tally Ho is not to be beat.
Yikes.
Any final thoughts, burger related or otherwise? Anything else you'd like to share with the listeners?
As I mentioned before, just sort of briefly, we do owe a lot of our success of last year, which was a record-breaking year for NIS, to how quickly we've been accepted and embraced by the Switch community. For that, we really, really, really do thank every single one who has picked up a title on the Switch. It was sort of a rather risky proposition at the beginning, but we had a lot of faith behind it, and it has paid off tenfold. And we're really, really, honestly thankful for each and every Switch fan we have out there.
Well, we are thankful for you and your company's offerings. I can tell you that we have a lot of fans, particularly in our Discord, that are on top of every single collector's edition that you guys put out for the Switch. Every single. We know multiple people that truly actually own every single collector's edition from NIS America.
Incredible.
It really is.
And we know a couple that when they miss one, they usually have 2 of another collector's edition, and they go on a rampant run to try to find somebody to trade with.
Do you want to give me the real inside scoop?
Sure.
If you see a title and it says sold out, pay really close attention right around about a month to the point of release, because some people, they order and then they cancel, or their credit card comes back incorrect or something like that. And occasionally, in that sort of launch area, we do open up a couple more units. So if somebody out there has missed one, please make sure you're watching that page, because it will just sort of sneak up. And we don't usually typically put that out there. We don't usually say, a couple more units such and such just became more available, but it does happen. So if people miss out, do not fret. There is oftentimes a little bit of a chance.
It's a good tip. I hope everybody's paying attention. Well, again, Travis, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today and to give our listeners and these Switch fans, a lot of really, really insightful information. And we've really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah. Sol, Cyrix, it has been an absolute honor.
We would love at some point in the future to have you back, and I'm going to let Cyrix talk in a second.
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to not referring to the Princess Guide as the prince. I'm going to refer to it as the Japanese name.
It needs more words. It's not long enough.
Backfired again.
If you can fit it on the spine of the Switch case, it's not.
Again, thanks for stopping by, and we hope to have you on again at some point in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.